Today was definitely an up and down day for the Carolina Panthers. Started off with some pouring rain and quickly that dispersed, but we will get into everything as time goes on. This is Move the Chains with JJ. If you're new here, thank you so much for being here. Today, day 4 of Carolina Panthers training camp. It seemed like it was going to start off a little rough. I was there probably around 8:30 as soon as the gates open. Initially, the rain seemed like it was going to stay away, but I want to say probably about 10 or 15 minutes after, the rain started falling pretty heavily. But I will say the rain did stop as practice begun, so that was a great thing to see. Have a couple of things to get through today for sure. We'll do what we typically do with our injury update just to make sure everybody is on the same page. Not the best news at all. I will say we have officially had our first major camp injury. Special teams ace / safety Sam Franklin announced today, confirmed by Dave Canales, that Sam Franklin did suffer a broken foot this past weekend at Back Together Saturday in Bank of America Stadium. So that was definitely horrible news. We talked about the other day how Tommy Tremble was being shut down for hamstring tightness. Shaq Thompson also wasn't a participant today. It seems as though that's not that big of a deal. Dave Canales mentioned it was due to illness. He was out at practice. He just did not participate. Damian Lewis was also another guy who was very limited today. Dave Canales mentioned that Damian Lewis has had some shoulder tightness. He participated in a couple of the individual drills, but he was not a go during team. And Dave Canales said they definitely wanted to keep him on the pitch count to make sure everything was clear on that front. So after starting camp off relatively clean, like we discussed, day 1, day 2, kind of surprising how everything was going. And unfortunately, over the past 2 days of camp, we have suffered some significant injuries with us seeing guys missing practices and things of that nature. Also, to add to the injury report, we talked about Stephen Sullivan. He did not participate, I want to say, on Saturday. On Thursday, we saw him carted back to the locker room. He was back out there today. He did make a couple of catches, so whatever the injury was, which I really still haven't gotten a confirmation on what it was. Maybe that's just a lack of information on my part. I need to do better on it, but I still have not confirmed what was going on with him. But I will say he was back out there today. He was back active, was in the passing scheme. Seems like he didn't lose a step, so he seemed to be good to go. Did have a very scary moment as well during one-on-ones today. Daewood Davis, huge collision, hit the ground very hard, was down for about 5 or 6 minutes. They ended up having to bring the cart out onto the practice field for him, flip practice around to the other side of the field, brought the cart out, put him on the cart, and he was off. Dave Canales afterwards said it was a thigh injury. Initially, with the way he fell and the way he was kind of laying on the ground, I initially thought that it was his back or his head. However, again, Dave Canales did confirm that that was a thigh injury. That's definitely something that we're going to be looking to as well, because in my opinion, Daewood Davis has had a solid camp. One of those guys that was brought in all season. I believe he was in the UFL, if I'm not mistaken, or the XFL, whichever one. There's so many leagues that I kind of get confused on which one it was. But he was one of those signings that made a splash in his respective league. The Carolina Panthers brought him in with one of the first teams very early on him. Was having a solid camp. Wasn't doing anything too crazy, but he seemed to be doing enough to potentially land himself a roster spot. Now, with this setback that he suffered today, hopefully he won't miss an extended amount of time for that, because we want to see guys have the opportunity to continue to compete and to make the roster. So that was definitely disappointing, and definitely wishing Daewood Davis the best of luck in his recovery. And again, hopefully the injury isn't too significant. Now, quick overview just of practice overall, and then we'll get to our 3 takeaways. We'll get to our good, bad, and ugly. Couple of quick observations. The run game was definitely more prevalent, in my opinion, today. It seemed as though the balance was a little bit more than it had been in the past. I would say we were leaning probably like 65 or 35 pass over the past 2 or 3 days of camp. Today, it was a little bit different. I would say that the percentage is probably 60-40 today. if not about 55-45, somewhere in that range. So definitely seeming as though, we're taking that next step in the playbook. Seems as though Dave Canales was happy with some of the progression that he had seen throughout what we had been working in the past. A lot more implementation of the run game today. So that was good to see, but we will expound on that a little bit later on, because that's definitely in the good, the bad, the ugly, just the run game as a whole, kind of how I feel about it, etc. So we'll touch on that a little bit more. Another takeaway, Trevin Wallace, to me, had a good day today. Won a couple of one-on-one reps. He was in on the run game when they went 11 on 11. So that was great to see. He was one of those guys that a lot of you all have been asking for, as far as what he was doing during team, how he looked, etc. He looks explosive. He does. He looks explosive. And though they're not in pads today, which they will be tomorrow will be the first day of pads. Though they're not in pads and haven't been in pads up until this point, he seems like what he really wants to do is hit. And in your linebackers, that's really what you want. That's all you really want in your linebackers. So good to see him have a good day. Hopefully he can stack those days like a couple of the receivers have been doing, but we will jump into that a little bit later on as well. From an overall standpoint, energy was high. Energy was very, very high, and I don't know, what it was. I don't know if it was because it was a little gloomy outside, so the guys felt like they needed to bring a little more juice or what. But there was a lot of chatting today. J.C. Horn, Deontay Johnson, etc. A lot of back and forth between the offense and defense. And what better time for that really to happen than the day before pads come on, because all of that talking, now you got to back it up, which is something that Johnathan Mingo mentioned in his press conference after practice. So I'm loving what I've been seeing from the team overall. From a competitive standpoint, it seems every day the level of competition is increasing. That's something that Dave Canales referenced in his press conference today after practice, and really has maintained the stance all throughout, is that he wanted to instill competition. That's why there's so many wide receivers on the depth chart right now. That's why you see a lot of these pieces from the O-line standpoint that have been added to compete and push the people that are in front of them after going out and spending the amount of money that we have. The level of competition was at a very high volume today, and I love to see it. I really do. I can't wait. I'm almost itching to get back to practice tomorrow, because I want to see how they can stack these days up, and I want to see what the result is going to be. Who will win? Today, we'll kind of work a little bit backwards, but today, as far as who won the day, to me, there was really no clear-cut winner. The defense made a lot of good plays. The offense made a lot of good plays. Obviously, in the past, we've seen the defense force a couple more turnovers than they did today. I want to say there was maybe one fumble, and that fumble came like way down the field after, the play had pretty much ended. Everybody had really given up on the play, so we didn't see any turnovers caused by the defense today. However, I think that today really was an even split. It was a lot of individual work. Team periods weren't necessarily as long as they had been. They still did go with 3 team periods, but it seemed like reps were a little limited. It seemed as though they wanted to focus just on installation, individual work, and then there were a couple of different special teams periods as well. And that's actually how they started. So a little bit different today, a little bit of a different feel. But when the ball was in the air, when we had 1-on-1s, 7-on-7s, 11-on-11s, etc., very high competition. If you guys wouldn't mind just taking the time, like and comment on this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. For Panthers Fans Only is a full podcast that me and a couple of my buddies do. I've been on site of training camp every single day up until this point. Right now on my schedule, I only have myself missing one day, and that will be FanFest on next Thursday, I believe. So if you want to continue to get videos like this with somebody that's on the ground, taking in practice, sights and sounds, etc., with some added video here and there, again, like, comment, subscribe, turn the bell notification on, and also go follow us on Twitter, because while I'm at practice, I'm constantly updating what's going on. So if it feels like, you're not able to make one of the practices or whatever the case may be, I try and bridge that gap between not being able to be there and getting as much information as possible, just as though you were there. Follow us there at FPFO_podcast. A lot of film coming out of that, as well as just a lot of content, analysis, etc., and just breaking down pretty much what I'm seeing as I'm going to camp. Now, to get into our 3 takeaways. The first one I already mentioned, but I'll kind of expound on it now. Number 1 would be the run game was more prevalent today. Like I mentioned, Dave Canales today after practice talked about how they were looking for perfection from an execution standpoint on certain plays and certain sets, splits, etc. So seeing the run game get a little more active today, to me, was a good sight, because in previous days, it seemed as though the focus was more so on the pass game. And obviously, you do want to develop your young quarterback. You do want to make sure he's getting as many reps as possible. However, I know how vocal Dave Canales has been about the run game, feeling as though the run game is how you win, winning in the trenches, etc. So seeing that put on display today was definitely a step in the right direction for me. Now, again, later on, the good, the bad, the ugly, we'll kind of talk about it even more in detail, the run game as a whole. But I will say just the implementation of adding more runs to the script, etc., was really a good feeling, because we know Carolina Panthers football. We do. On For Panthers Fans Only, we talked about the brand of football as a whole changing, but we were able to see the success that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had with the approach that Dave Canales has put on display, with the run first, going down the line a little bit, setting up your play action passes and things of that nature. So very, very excited to see the implementation of the run game, especially with pads coming on tomorrow. Those guys in the trenches will get a little more work, a little more physicality we'll see, and then the pads will be popping a little bit more as well, because we know how Chuba Hubbard runs. We know how Boone runs a little bit. So definitely excited to see the offense progress on that front, because like I said before, the run game hadn't really been on display to me prior to today. So great to see that. That was the first takeaway that I had. The second takeaway that I have is the O-line was very solid in the passing game today. Now, I haven't really spent much time on the offensive line just because I've been looking elsewhere. I've really been focusing on those skill positions and things of that nature, as well as the fact that the defense really up front had really been doing a good job, which was more surprising to me, just based on the fact that we all kind of had the understanding that we would need a little bit more help up front from a D-line standpoint. Offensive line today, however, was very, very good within the pass game. Bryce Young had ample amount of time to throw the football. Andy Dalton, Jake Plummer, the same exact thing for those guys as well. The pocket seemed to hold up a little bit longer than it had been in the past. When the pocket did break down, guys were still pushed out of the way to kind of create that run lane or that step-up lane for Bryce Young to either take off or make a play down the field, making him comfortable with keeping his eyes down the field, etc. So shout out to the offensive line, because they had a really, really solid day, in my opinion, specifically in the passing game. And that's also good to see based on the fact that Damian Lewis, like I mentioned earlier, did not participate in a lot of the live drills. So shout out to the offensive line again, because they did have a solid day in the passing game, thus leading to a lot more success within that department than we've seen over the past couple of days. Third takeaway from today, and it's going to sound like, offense won today, even though I said that it was kind of a tie, it was kind of split. Everybody made good plays all around the field. It was just, for me, my focus today was just more shifted towards the offense, because it kind of caught my attention with their approach and everything like that. So I was more focused today on offense, admittedly. But my third takeaway today, Xavier Legette was more involved. Now, that being said, I do not believe Xavier Legette has yet to put his full talents and abilities on full display. I know that we saw the bomb 2 or 3 days ago down the field, catch that went viral. And then again, we saw another catch on Back Together Saturday when he ran the deep out route. However, today, from an overall standpoint, it seemed like XL made a lot of strides. He was a lot more involved in the offense, caught a couple more passes, got a couple more reps with the ones. He still isn't fully running with the ones. He's still kind of in that 2 and 3. However, based on what we saw today, I did like the fact that it seemed as though the offensive coaching staff was making the effort to get this young guy involved, because up until this point, it seems as though they were kind of having a hard time with that. Today, it was a lot better. So shout out to Xavier Legette for taking that step. Again, another guy that we're going to be focusing on, another guy that was brought in to be a weapon for Bryce Young. Hopefully, he can continue to stack those days like we've seen with Terrace Marshall Jr. and Johnathan Mingo, two guys that we'll talk about a little bit later on as well. But did love what I saw from Xavier Legette today after a relatively pedestrian start to the summer over the first 2 or 3 sessions of camp. Now for the good, the bad, the ugly. The good, Bryce Young does in fact have multiple options this year. Last year, from an offensive perspective, we know what the problem was. It was lack of protection for Bryce Young up front, and also a lack of weapons and talent on the outside, and really just all throughout the wide receiver room as a whole, with younger guys coming in and having a lot on their plate, guys that really just didn't have the ability to get the job done, etc. This year, up until this point, that has not been the case. Now, you can say whatever you want about the secondary and the lack of names and the lack of depth that we have there, but I would like to look at it from a glass half full lens, because I genuinely believe that we're going to see a huge step from Johnathan Mingo this year. We're going to see a huge step from Terrace Marshall this year as well, just based on what we've seen at camp. I've seen a lot of people on X talking about, how Terrace Marshall Jr. kind of does this. This is kind of habitual thing for him. And to me, I don't believe that's the case. Me personally, I don't believe that's the case. I don't think that I've seen Terrace Marshall Jr. be this active in camp since he's been a Carolina Panther. He made a couple of great catches once again today. Johnathan Mingo, once again, when the pocket may break down or the pressure is getting to Bryce and he has to escape the pocket, oftentimes on these kind of scramble drills that we're seeing from Bryce Young, he's checking down or getting the football to Johnathan Mingo. That to me is major, because last year we kind of saw a lack of ability from Johnathan Mingo to get open, one, and for two, nobody really made that step to be a reliable target for Bryce Young. So seeing this early in camp, to me, is very, very encouraging. And it's not just Terrace Marshall and Johnathan Mingo that has stood out. Deontay Johnson, if you go back to day one of camp, you can see the title of the video. He is set up to be a star within this offense. That is the first read. He definitely will be the first option. Adam Thielen, Mr. Reliable, coming off a 1,000-yard season. He hasn't really seemed to have lost a step. The tight ends also. The tight ends, to me, have been performing very well. If you look at Jordan Matthews, you look at Steven Sullivan, though he did miss a practice, he did come back and, again, was kind of active in what we were doing offensively. And then the young guy with JT Sanders, it seems as though the Carolina Panthers did the right thing with surrounding Bryce with the weapons, and I'm very, very excited with the progression that I've seen over the past 4 days from Johnathan Mingo and Terrace Marshall Jr. Those are two names that you guys are going to continue to hear from me throughout this summer. I told you all a couple days ago, I have been extremely vocal about Terrace Marshall Jr. I thought Terrace Marshall Jr. was on the bubble to get cut, like a lot of you all did as well. That couldn't be further from the truth at this very second. At this very second, Terrace Marshall Jr. seems to be wide receiver 2/wide receiver 3, in my opinion. It seems as though that's what he's tracking towards, and I love to see it. Now the bad. I mentioned the offensive line earlier being specifically good in the passing game. The bad was just the lack of pop plays. Now, I know it is very, very, very early. Obviously, we talked about how Damian Lewis was down today, so that definitely could have played a part in kind of the results of some of the run plays that we saw, because, again, they were at a higher volume, in my opinion. But we still haven't really seen that pop from the running back room. Now, help could potentially be on the way. With Jonathan Brooks being cleared, we would assume within the next 2-3 weeks max. However, right now with Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders, Raheem Blackshear, Mike Boone, etc., right now the run game does seem as though it's lacking that pop ability. Now, could that change when the pads come on? Absolutely, because I understand the significance of offensive line being able to grab guys on the defensive line inside of their pads, being able to work guys the way they need to for the run game to be successful. So maybe that's the reason why we have yet to see that pop. However, I just simply have not seen it yet, and I know how heavy Dave Canales is on the running side of things, and so that's definitely something that I'm going to be looking for. However, today it just simply was not there, in my opinion, even with the volume of the run plays being called up. And really, it's not to be an overreaction. It's just something that I'm looking forward to. I'm kind of keeping a close eye on it, because I do want to see that develop a little bit more going into the season. And for the ugly, this is kind of good news, really, just because it really was a clean practice for the most part today. The ugly, the rain pre-practice, and I did mention how it stopped before practice. However, it was raining so hard that you could tell that a couple of guys were not attacking their routes, not attacking some of the footwork things as hard as we had seen the past couple of days, just because there was kind of a sense of paranoia with that, and I understand it. And so that's kind of why that is our ugly today. It's just it was raining so hard, and that's really the third day out of 4 that it has rained since training camp has been in Charlotte. So it's one of those things where, you know, if you're Charlotte native or whatever the case may be, it is good that it's right in your backyard. However, in Spartanburg, it was not raining this often. So I'm sure it's been kind of frustrating for the coaching staff as well as the players, and just not being able to have that sense of security in what they're doing just based on the weather. And last but not least, for our kicking battle, I've mentioned multiple times that I was cheering for Mevis in this kicking battle, but it seems as though right now Eddie Pinheiro does have the advantage. Today was Eddie Pinheiro's day. Harrison Mevis, we saw him kick in back-to-back days. We saw him kick on Thursday as well as back together Saturday. In those 2 practices, he missed 3 combined field goals, 2 on Saturday and 1 on Thursday. Today, Eddie Pinheiro went 5 for 5. Not sure what his longest was. I'm not sure if anybody updated that. But what I do know is the longest field goal that he made was further than 50 yards. It was a 50-plus yard field goal. To be quite frank, it was right down the middle. Right now, to me, Eddie Pinheiro does have the advantage within the kicking game. So shout out to Eddie. Hopefully Harrison Mevis will still get his opportunities. Not sure who will kick tomorrow, but I will definitely keep you guys updated on that. But just to add even a little bit more context to that, Eddie Pinheiro overall has not missed in camp. He hasn't. During OTAs, that was the thing that Mevis had going for him, was the fact that he hadn't missed. Now, over the last 2 practices, we've seen he has missed, and now today, Eddie Pinheiro during live goes 5 for 5 to add on to the 3 for 3 or the 4 for 4, whatever he was on day 1. And now those days are starting to stack in Eddie Pinheiro's favor. So definitely a matchup that I'm still locked in and intrigued by. Wanted to update you guys. I know that's something that you all have your opinions about as well. So right now, that's where we are at. I have Eddie Pinheiro being kicker 1 at this very moment in time. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, if you haven't already, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Follow us on Twitter to stay up to date with everything that's going on throughout camp, throughout practice, see some of the film, see immediate feedback from my end, and just stay up to date overall of what we're doing overall as a channel, what we're doing as a podcast, etc. Again, thank you all so much for being here, and we will be back tomorrow again with our Day 5 recap of Carolina Panthers training camp. Peace.